Welcome to Australia's National Fossil Day. And to find out why June the 26th was chosen, please check out last year's video, which will hopefully have a link below or at the end of this video. Now I'd like to share with you something special I got to do a few years ago. And though not strictly Australian paleontology, I think you'll quickly see why I wanted to share it. In 2018, I was lucky enough to be working as an education assistant at Chicago's Field Museum and was involved in a number of special events, such as the opening of the new display of Sue, the world's most famous T-Rex. You may not realise this, but the Field is one of the few museums that actively does paleontology in Antarctica, and they have found a lot of amazing fossils over the years. Finally, they took all what they'd learnt and all that they'd found and made a new exhibit, which is currently travelling the world. Now, prehistorically, there was of course no Antarctica, or Australia, as both were joined together in a much larger supercontinent called Gondwana. This explains why a large amount of material on display is based on Australian fossils, or the exact same fossils have been found in Antarctica that were found in Australia as well, and that's why I'm sharing this video today. We were the exact same landmass at the time. Now, maybe because I'm an Australian, and so I'm a true Gondwanan, but I like to think that having done educational tours all over the world, I was asked to create the first guided tours of this display, to not only present this material to the museum's members and its VIPs, but also to train the Field Museum staff so they could do tours of the display as well. What you're about to see here is almost the complete tour of the Field Museum's travelling display called Antarctica Dinosaurs. I'll also place into the video photos of the fossils and displays I'm talking about, as they are often obscured by the crowd. Now, we'll admit here that in a few sections the sound isn't fantastic. Luckily, as a tour guide, I am loud, so even here you shouldn't have too much trouble hearing me, so please, just hang in there, things will get better. And I do apologise for the crying baby at one point, I could do nothing about that. Once upon a time on a snowy Chicago Saturday.
Did anybody have any questions about the museum while we're waiting? Would you like to know something about our elephants?
Sure.
So, Carl Akeley is like the guy who came up with this new style of creating dioramas. Before this time, before in the 1800s, 1880, 1860, people would go out and shoot an elephant, they'd skin it, they'd send the skin back to the museum, to a place that nobody's ever seen an elephant before, because nobody really travelled back then and there weren't really elephants in zoos. And so if you didn't know about all these wrinkles and all this loose skin, you just stuff it like a teddy bear. And that's what they do, they just stuff it like a teddy bear, so none of the animals looked realistic. But Carl Akeley actually went to Africa and shot these elephants, but while he was there he noticed, oh, we've been doing this wrong, we've got to come up with a new style. So he came up with a style of actually carving the animal underneath and then putting the skin on top to make it a lot more realistic. So that's the interesting thing, but now for the fun thing, he went with his wife. He shot one, his wife shot the other one. Now if you look at these two elephants, which one do you think the wife shot?
The big one.
The big one. Now unfortunately, things didn't go so well during this tour, and by the time they got back, they pretty much got divorced. So if you look at the display, what's the little one that he shot, what's it doing to the big one? So forever, his elephant is winning the fight over his wife. And that literally is why it's doing that. It's quite amazing. We're talking the male ego here. It's very fragile. So, but yeah, and then he came up with this new style. He then went to New York and did a lot of the New York displays, and then that's kind of spread to the rest of the world. So Chicago, these are the very first realistic animal dioramas. Over here we have Maximo. Maximo is a cast. It's basically found in South America, Argentina, just like China. They're one of the two places that don't allow their fossils to be exported. You can't buy any Chinese fossils, you can't buy any Argentinian fossils. So Maximo's a cast, but Argentina has kindly lent us the actual fossils. So while you're looking around, over in the corner are the real fossils. They won't be here for much longer because they're only on a short-term loan while this is on display. So make sure you check those out because you actually get to see the real fossils. The biggest animal that ever lived. Does anybody know what the biggest animal alive today is? Blue whale. Does that hurt your hand? So, the blue whale gets to about 100 feet long. Maximo here is 122 feet. So the biggest animal that ever lived. But the blue whale probably would be almost 3 times as heavy, but much longer. And the length is probably wrong, because we've missed, and whenever you look at any dinosaur skeleton, we've kind of forgotten to add something. Does anybody have back problems? And you have like a slip disc in your back. Between each bone is a little disc of cartilage. We haven't left the space for all the cartilage. So theoretically, all dinosaur skeletons could almost be 1/3 longer if we actually in life added the space for that cartilage. So 122 feet is the low estimate of how big these guys are. We found 6. They were all exactly the same age. They were around teenagers, so they still had more growing to do. They had probably reached the length. They weren't going to get much longer. They would start to get a lot bulkier. And crocodiles do the same thing. Once they get to a certain size, then they just start getting big and mean. Now I'm just checking the time. I think we're ready to go. So we might head in or head over to the Antarctic dinosaur display. So if you'd like to follow me, we'll go inside. All right. Welcome to the Field Museum's tour of the Antarctic dinosaur display. My name's Phil. If you've got any questions, don't be afraid to ask, just raise your hands. I know everything there is to know about everything, and if I don't know it, I'm going to make it up. Of course, I'm talking with an Australian accent, you're going to go, oh, isn't he lovely and believe me? Nah, but you never believe anything an Australian says. All right. Here we have a modern map of Antarctica. What we're going to discover is Antarctica throughout the ages has never looked like this. This is a very modern view of Antarctica. What I really want you to remember is this mountain range running basically through the middle of the continent. That's going to become a very important mountain range. We're going to talk about that a lot. So this is what Antarctica looks like today. Covered in ice. At the end, we're actually going to see a map of what Antarctica looks like without the ice, and you'll be a bit surprised at just how much land there is under that ice. So we're going to move on just into the first slide. Just make sure this gentleman can get through. Okay. Antarctica was basically the last frontier. Everybody had been everywhere in the world. The place we hadn't been was the South Pole. And there was a lot of fame to be won if you got to the South Pole first. The English, because they basically owned the entire world back then, they wanted to be to the first to the South Pole more than anyone else, and they spent a lot of money trying to get to the South Pole. They failed miserably. Because, has anybody been to England? Not a lot of snow there, not a lot of conditions that are great for travelling across these vast wastelands of ice. One of these missions they went, well, you know, all these Eskimos and stuff, they use sled dogs. Let's make sled dogs. Does anybody know actually how to use a sled dog team? They didn't. And so they got there going, okay, much. And if you don't know how to control the sled dog team, they're going to scatter like cats. So that failed miserably. So around 1914, they went, right, we're really going to get serious now. We're going to get to the South Pole. And in the Commonwealth countries, this is a very famous story, especially in Australia, because they basically live in Australia. Scott of the Antarctic. Scott of the Antarctic was the biggest mission to get to the South Pole. They spent a lot of money. They weren't very successful either, but they were very determined. Now, if you're going to the South Pole and you're not very good with the sled dogs, what's another animal that's very useful for travelling long distances that you can ride? What would you take? A horse! Hands up if you take a horse! You can join the English Scott of the Antarctic team. They took horses. They took horses and they were very determined to ride their horses and use them to carry their sleighs all the way to the South Pole. And they even created special snowshoes for the horses. And when we go on the other side, you'll actually see some. There's the actual snowshoes for the horses. Now, do you think this would have worked very well? Not at all. Within about a week, the horses had slipped over and fallen down crevasses and all died horribly. Terrible idea. So they ended up having to take these sleds, and this is one of the actual sleds, and drag them all the way from the coast to the South Pole and all the way back. that's basically what we're going to look at now. A lot of these items from the Scott mission. Paleontology, you'll hear see talk about the dinosaurs. The very first, over here it says the very first fossils discovered in Antarctica are these ones. That's not quite true. A scientific expedition showed up to Antarctica and some whalers found them and went, oh, we found these fossils on that island over there. Now, we're not saying they're alive. What we're saying scientifically, you can't actually trust that they could have come from anywhere. So those are the actual first fossils that have been produced. These are the very first fossils scientifically described. So I'll give you a couple of minutes just to have a quick look around, and I'll point some stuff out as you look. But just have a quick look around here and check out the fossils, and we'll continue the story of Scott in a minute. So they made sure they took waterproof clothes. That's great if you're going to somewhere in the tropics where it rains a lot. They're going somewhere where it's really cold. And if you look at this clothing, can you see any insulation whatsoever? So they took clothes that would keep them dry. So you can kind of see this as and there are the horseshoes as they head toward their camp. Now, today, the one example. Now, what happened to Scott at the Antarctic? So he had to drag his team dragged their sleighs all the way into and they get there, they actually make it to the South Pole, and they get there, and there's the Norwegian flag flapping there. And they're like, damn you, Norway! So what happens is, the Norwegians also wanted to get to the South Pole. Has anybody been to Norway or any of the Scandinavian countries? There's lots of snow and lots of ice, and they know how to use dogs, and they know how to ski. And so basically they just put on their skis and went, let's go. Chunk, made it, selfie, let's go home. Meanwhile, Scott and his team dragging their stuff all the way. You get there, there's the Norwegian flag, they've been beaten. The problem is, they had spent a lot of money trying to get to the South Pole. They realised they need to get something out of this trip. Scientifically, the big mystery at the time was continental drift. Can we prove that continents were moving and were connected at one time? There is a fossil, a very important fossil called Glossopteris. It looks a bit like a gum leaf or a eucalyptus leaf. It looks like a tongue, which Glossopteris means. It is found in Africa, it's found in South America, it's found in Australia, it's found in Madagascar, it's found in India, all the southern continents. It has never been found in a single northern continent. And that immediately told us, at some stage, all the southern continents were joined together, all the northern continents were probably joined together, but not to the south. And this tree had populated the entire continent. It had never been found in Antarctica. If they could find Glossopteris in the fossil record on the way back, that would be a victory. They would pretty much prove the idea of continental drift. On the way back, they actually found an exposed layer of rock. They spent a day collecting fossils. And then grabbed their sleighs and continued on the way. And then a snowstorm hit. So they went, all right, let's build our tents, let's just wait out the storm. And they did. And the storm got worse. And it got worse. And it got even worse, it became a blizzard, became terrible, and now they're running out of food, and now they're running out of water, and now they're writing things in their diaries like, oh, Bill, he was so brave, he realised we've only got so much food left, so Bill would bravely walk off into the distance, take no food, and would kill himself and take none of the resources left. Yeah, I reckon they ate Bill, because remember, it's them writing that, so they're like, we ate Bill. No, they didn't eat Bill. But we just find they all died. Every single one of them died. They died 10 miles from their next base camp. If they had not stopped for that one day looking for fossils, they would have made that distance, or at least they wouldn't have stopped. They would have just kept plowing ahead. It would have only been a mile to go. So because they stopped for those fossils, they were actually all killed. Later on, rescue teams went out looking for them and found all of the items that you're looking at. These are all items from the destroyed Scott expedition where they died. And these are the actual fossils. When we found them, There was no food, there was no anything. Most of their equipment they'd thrown away, but they thought these fossils were so important that they kept dragging them all the way back to the coast. And these are the actual fossils that were found with the dead bodies. So, quite an amazing little item, and you would probably just walk past it and that story. So this is one of the few times we can say that fossils killed someone. Now, one of the things I really love is the way this is set up, that we actually get to go through the tents, go through the camp, into the next section. So does anybody have any questions about this section? British Commonwealth, like so in Australia and New Zealand, that was a big story. Outside of it, yeah, that'd be really nice.
Sorry, it's okay.
Okay, so what we're looking at here is Antarctica basically during the Permian, before the dinosaurs, about 50 to 100 million years before the dinosaurs. Glossopteris, the plant I was talking about, was a Permian plant. And if you look at the trees all around you, and especially behind you, we have recreated Glossopteris. That's what it would have looked like. There are some far superior Glossopteris fossils over the corner, all from Antarctica. One of the things that has proven continental drift since then is we are finding fossils of animals in Antarctica that are the exact same animals as those found in South Africa or South America or India, and that's a display of them over there. You will see there's a South African one, for example, and then they'll have an Antarctica one, and they're identical. Now, it's not that cold. It's not as cold as Antarctica is today. There wasn't that much ice in the poles, but during winter it would have got very cold. So we don't really find crocodiles and things. What we do find, the number one predator that was in Antarctica at this time, are crocofrogs, crocodiles. These are giant amphibians that were alive at the time. Now, I don't know if you've seen anything about frogs, but frogs are voracious predators. You put anything in front of a frog and it will try and eat it. They can stick it in their mouth, they're going to eat it. Now look at the size of this mouth. And this is a little one. In Melbourne, Australia, which was connected to Antarctica at the time, we have found one with its head about this big. These were gigantic creatures. Now we've still got amphibians today. We've got frogs and salamanders. With your hands, guys, can you show me how big is the biggest frog or salamander like today? Well, that's pretty big. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Are your arms as wide as they can go? Keep going. It's about this big. If you're ever lucky enough to go to China, you might see the Chinese giant salamander. Now you're not going to believe this. They live in China. They're gigantic and they're a salamander, so isn't that a great name? Giant Chinese salamander. And they are the biggest amphibian alive today, so it's amazing to think there are still giant amphibians in the world. You can see the skull of this one over there. You can actually see these were frogs with teeth. They were just like crocodiles. They actually had big teeth. They were just a little bit different sort of shape too. Behind you are a lot of the plants that were found in Antarctica. And I especially love this. Alright, so we have rebuilt Antarctica. What is Antarctica here today? This fossil here is a cast of the actual very first dinosaur bone ever found in Antarctica. Now it was found by a geologist, and we don't like to talk about geologists. Geologists are weird people, very uncreative, and they don't have any sense of humour. So basically this geologist like, I don't care because I'm a geologist, I like rocks. So he went, I happen to know a paleontologist, I'm looking at the wall, hey Bill, I found a dinosaur bone. Oh, I found a dinosaur bone, where is it? Oh, it's just in Antarctica. I'll be over there because I'm in Antarctica at the moment. And so he brought a helicopter over to that mountain range we were looking at in the original map. This is now on that mountain range. Permanently exposed rocks, and you can see it in the photo behind us. These rocks are pretty much exposed all year round. And you can kind of see, you know, it's pretty bare. There's no grass or anything. It's Antarctica. So it's quite easy to see these fossils. So they dug it up to realise it's a dinosaur bone. It is the field museum that has been running this deep. We have gone back over 20 years. We have done 4 expeditions to collect as many of these bones out of this place as we can, and that's what we're going to be seeing next. The 20 years worth of work. The this is the first time they've ever been on display, so the Field Museum is presenting them, and they're about to travel the rest of the world. Now, would anybody like to touch one of the real dinosaur bones found at this site? It's in the rock directly behind you. And if you go over in the corner, you'll see this found, and here you can see how we find these rocks. We put a protective barrier on it, we put it in a net, we called in the helicopter came over, picked it up off this mountain range, flew it all the way to the coast, where it was prepared again, put in a box, shipped all the way to the Field Museum, where it was unwrapped and began to prepare the fossils in this. Now you'll see there's a series of grey little rocks on this, that's the bone. What we were hoping, now if you take your thumb and run it down your back, you'll feel lots of little bumps. On your vertebra, there are tiny little bumps at the top, and we were thinking inside this rock was the entire vertebra with that tiny little bump on the top. And we had a whole series of them. And so we began to dig, and we began to prepare, and we began to find nothing. There was nothing in there. Because what we'd actually found, it was the upside down. The bone was on top of this rock and it's weathered away. And what's left is just a little piece at the very tip of the bone. So we're going to draw this all the way back, and there's really nothing there. So scientifically, not a lot to learn. But for the public, you get to touch. Yeah, you get to touch a real piece of these Antarctic dinosaurs. We found Cryolophosaurus. Can you say Cryolophosaurus? Now, over 20 years, 4 tours, every time we find a bit more. Cryolophosaurus is a very unusual dinosaur. We are in basically the beginning of the Jurassic. The Jurassic are some of the rarest fossils on the planet. Despite the name Jurassic Park, and we think, oh, these dinosaurs are from Jurassic Park, almost every dinosaur from Jurassic Park was from the Cretaceous after it. Jurassic dinosaurs are very rare, Jurassic fossils are incredibly rare, and the early Jurassic are the rarest of the lot, and we were finding them in Antarctica. Cryolophosaurus was the largest animal on the planet at the time, definitely the largest predator at the time. It has a very strange crest on its head. What it was used for is anybody's guess, and it seriously is up for guess. We're still trying to work it out. Does anybody have an idea what it might be used for? Or you might. So like a weapon. It might be a weapon, but if you look at it, is it quite small? Yes. Is it very thin? What happens when you hit something with a thin bone? It's going to snap. So that's not a great idea. We think perhaps they were a lot like birds, that this was a display, that it might be a different colour, especially during mating season. And so we're at Antarctica at the time, and Antarctica at the South Pole, it's dark for about 3 months of the year. So having a visual display that might shine a bit brighter in the low light would definitely help you out a lot. And plus, if you're 2 males, maybe just by looking at that you can see the size of it and go, well, he's a big fella, don't want to mess with him. So we're not really sure. We have found 2 skulls, and they are both on display over there, and you'll be able to see the crest on there. The second skull, there is almost none of it. It's actually just the very last part of the skull. But scientifically, that's a very important part. That's where it attaches to the neck, and we learn a lot from that. So you'll be able to see the 2 types of skulls. As you're looking around, that very first dinosaur bone is the one over in the corner of that big cabinet over there. So you'll actually be able to see the very first dinosaur bone found in Antarctica. So please go ahead, have a quick look around. I'll point some stuff out as you look, and then we'll move on to the next section. So here we have another section of what Antarctica would look like today. A lot of these trees in the background are similar to trees you will find in parts of South America, in Australia, especially Tasmania, and New Zealand. Does anybody seen amber? Amber from the Baltics is from these sorts of trees, which is why it's not sap, it's not tree sap, it's tree resin, which comes from a very specific type of tree. Now, here we have some small dinosaurs that are actually the very early forms of Maximo out the front. So the biggest dinosaur, the biggest animal that ever lived, started off as 4-legged, very small, but you can see they're starting to grow the long neck. And as they get bigger and that long neck grows longer, they will start to walk on 4 legs because basically it just gets too hard to stand on 2 legs with a very long neck. You can't really see giraffes walking around on 2 legs. They'll just keep tripping over. we actually find a predator here as well. If you look at the picture, can anybody point to the predator? There he is over in the corner. We found basically a giant honey badger-like creature, and that fossil of the honey badger actually had baby dinosaurs in its stomach. We knew it was definitely going out and finding small dinosaurs, baby dinosaurs, and eating them. And if anybody watched that document or that funny YouTube video, the honey badger don't care, these things would have been nasty predators. Except not nasty as enough, because we did find a tooth, and here is the tooth of this predator, in the stomach of Cryolophosaurus. So Cryolophosaurus we did find its last meal, and it was one of those weird honey badger things. So the honey badger did care. We also found a pterosaur bone, and pterosaur bones are some of them, and you can see one flying there, they're some of the rarest bones in the world. Now, something I would like you to look at as we're moving through, the fossils from this dinosaur are some of the prettiest fossils I have seen on the planet. We're in this corner here, the skull especially, I'll get out of the way guys, it's this beautiful caramel colour. It is one of the prettiest fossils you'll ever see. I'll get out of the way and have a look. So you will notice the fossils from this dinosaur have not been prepared. They're still in the rock. So what used to happen is you would go out, you would find your dinosaur, you would spend months digging it out of the dirt, protecting it in like cases and sending it back to the museum, where they would spend years preparing these fossils, making sure they're stable, not going to shatter, and then after maybe 10 years they'll start to put them on display. That no longer happens, because here we have the actual bones, and what we did, is we scanned them. We took them to a CAT scan, scanned the fossils, and once we've scanned the fossils, we can print the fossils. So within not years, we can scan it on a Monday, start printing it on a Wednesday, have it on display by the Friday. And this has completely changed. We may never have to actually prepare a lot of fossils anymore, just because of the simple idea of scanning it. This is the actual scan of these fossils. So that is a remarkable step. That's one of the greatest steps in paleontology in the last 30, 40 years. It's quite amazing. Right. Any questions about this bit? Right. Some of these dinosaurs were found so recently that they haven't actually been named. So the one over there is Glaciasaurus, and this is the small one. We actually have found parts of a much larger one. So you can start to see how Maximo, as it got larger and longer neck, it's had to start walking on four legs. It was just getting too big, too heavy, and would eventually turn into those giant four-legged animals. This hasn't even been named yet. It's just called Sauropodomorpha, A or B. What I love is on one of these trips, on the last trip, you saw that exposed rocks. They were there, and it's quite backbreaking working on these fossils. And one guy went, "Oh, my back, I'm so sore," and he's just looking across this vast plain of rocks in front of me. Is that another bone all the way over on that other side? Oh, I have to go have a look. So he walked all the way around, and sure enough, he found the bones from this much larger dinosaur in the ground. But what was mystery is, around those bones were saw marks. So one of the earlier teams had also seen those, had gone, "Oh, go check. Oh, it's a dinosaur, let's try and get them out. Oh, we're running out of time, we can't get them out," and just left and didn't record them, didn't put them on the map. And so it was only lucky this guy happened to see them. And these are the actual fossils that he saw. So if it wasn't for a sore back, we might not actually have these fossils. Or at least they'd still be in the ground. It had no ice. Why does it have ice today? Everything has to do with tidal currents. Now, as you can see here, today the tides actually circle Antarctica. Australia was connected to Antarctica, and that meant that water from the equator gets warm and would drop to the poles, where water that is cold would rise, and that's exactly like your house. Hot air rises, cold water falls. So the equator is warming the water, and that water will head to the poles and keep the poles relatively ice-free. However, once Australia separated from Antarctica, the tides actually started circling Antarctica and blocked all that warm water coming down. Literally could not pass through those the tides going around Antarctica, which means no more water, instantly freeze. And within a very short time, it's just completely covered in ice. Why is that important today? Has anybody noticed that the weather's getting a bit weird at the moment? The water of the equator warms, it rises to the North Pole, where cold water comes down and warms up and keeps cycling through. That spot between Alaska and Russia is called the Bering Strait. It is one of the narrowest passages on the planet, and it is silting up. All this stuff, all this rain, all this mud and dirt is washing out into the ocean and filling up this gap, which is stopping that tidal current. And if that tidal current stops, ice age. And I'm not saying 100 years, I'm saying 5 years. Imagine all the snow that fell last year is still on the ground. It doesn't get hot, it doesn't warm up during summer. It's all sitting there, and now you get the next year's worth of snow. How much snow are you going to have, and what are you going to do with it? And I'm not talking in your cities, because moving snow from cities is fine. What about your crop fields? You can't go clear the snow from all of those, and then next year you get snow, and next year you got snow, and now you've got no more crops. And America basically feeds the world. So if all those crops fail, we're in an ice age, and we're in big trouble. So that tidal current is very important. And we can see the example today. The north will turn into Antarctica. It's a very important thing. And we can see that in the fossils. All these fossils here are warm water fossils. They're sharks, shells that we only found in warm waters, and they've all gone because it's getting cold. Now I will quickly show you one more fossil, which is my favourite fossil.
Was being released into the atmosphere.
The biggest penguin alive today, emperor penguin. Here is a penguin foot bone. There is the giant penguin fossil foot bone. There used to be penguins as tall as me, with beaks this long, and they would have been ferocious predators. The giant penguin. Who's ever heard of the giant penguin? There's a fossil. The mosasaur. Here we have a mosasaur. Mosasaurs are reptiles. They are marine reptiles. They are still alive today. The biggest one's skull is about my size, but what gives them away today is their teeth. If you look at the eye, directly underneath the eye on the top of the skull, there's a second row of teeth. They've got teeth like us, but when they open their mouth, they've actually got a second row of teeth running right down the palate of the mouth. And the only animal alive today that has those are snakes. And if you look at the body, it's got a long snake-like body. In the jaw, it's actually got a hinge in the jaw. It can dislocate its jaw just like a snake. And what sort of tongues do snakes have? Do they have a big fat tongue like a lizard? Or do they have a really thin forked tongue? So a lot of snakes now have lost those coloured teeth, but the boa constrictor still has them. So if you evolved with teeth on the roof of your mouth, you want a big fat tongue, what's going to happen every time you close your mouth? It won't tongue. So that tongue, the bones tell us that mosasaurs turned into snakes, but that tongue tells us something else. Snakes have turned into something else. What is the biggest lizard in the world?
So less carbon dioxide, a greenhouse gas,
the Komodo.
is being released.
What sort of tongue does the Komodo dragon have?
With less carbon dioxide in the air,
forked
the
tongue.
whole Earth began
It's not a
to cool.
lizard. It's
In
a snake.
Antarctica, surrounded
It's a
by
snake with
ocean
legs,
current,
basically just like these
began to form
paddles.
glaciers.
Now, I'm not sure if you noticed by my accent,
And
I'm not
bigger.
I'm from
Today,
Australia.
the ice sheet
And when an
layer
Australian
in
tells you about
Antarctica
venomous
covers
snakes,
about 98%
you
of
can
the
believe
entire
this.
continent,
Can you?
making it the largest
There is no
single
such
massive
thing
ice
as a
on our planet.
non-venomous snake. All snakes are venomous. Just some snakes, their venom isn't very potent, or they don't have a lot of it, but they are all venomous. So if the Komodo is a snake, is it venomous? And they are actually venomous. So you live in a weird world where there's snakes with legs, and giant frogs living in China. Alright, very last.
We're just
There we go. Okay, so here is Antarctica today. Covered in ice, there's that mountain range we're talking about. You're about to see what it looks like when you take the ice away, how much land there is there, and you'll be quite surprised.
From the ground, air, and space, scientists can map the thickness of the ice, up to 2 miles in places.
Now what's important to remember, yes, this isn't the land you'll see in a second. This is what the land is like right now if we immediately took the ice away. But the ice is very heavy. It's actually pushing Antarctica down. Once we take the ice away, Antarctica will actually pop up. It will lift up and a lot more land will appear. But at the moment, come on, show us. The other thing I'll quickly talk about is theoretically a country owns the part of Antarctica that is facing its coastal line. So I hate to tell you, but Australia owns about 1/3 of Antarctica. It's ours and we're keeping it. Unfortunately, there's very little of the American coastline because it's mostly South America that faces it. New Zealand and even Russia gets a little bit when you look at the very Pacific side of Russia. When you go straight down, there's just nothing there. Come on, show us. Okay, last thing I'll talk about. Antarctica is also the best place on the planet to find meteorites. There we go, that's how much land there actually is. Not a lot. But remember, it will pop up. Now, being an optimist that I am, everyone keeps talking about climate change and the sea levels are going to rise and all those poor people in Fiji, they're going to lose their land and they're going to have to find somewhere else to live. It's going to be a whole new continent. They're all going to live in Antarctica. That's a very mean thing to say. But it's kind of true, as we have seen, and throughout the years, Antarctica has been quite livable. It'll be a bit like living in Canada. I'm talking about the social, political, economic, society of Canada, and that gives you an idea of how big it is. So yes, Antarctica is the perfect place to find meteorites, because Antarctica is white and meteorites aren't. And we actually have an Antarctica meteorite over the corner you can look at. Now it turns out one of these meteorites came from Mars. And when we looked at this meteorite, it had fossils in it. And I'll say that again. We found this rock from Mars that had fossils in it. This is evidence of life from Mars. Now for a short time, that fell out of favour because you can imagine all these people arguing the point. That can't be true. No, that can't possibly be true. We have since looked at every single rock we have been able to find from Mars because we get hit by a bunch of meteorites, and a lot of them do have these fossils. We're talking about microbes, but it is still life. We have evidence of life in meteorites from Mars. So that is quite amazing. Now, in paleontology, that means the question is, maybe life didn't appear on Earth. Maybe it was seeded by the Mars or some other place. But that's a terrible question, because that means you're just pushing it off on someone else. You haven't explained how life began in the first place. You're just saying, yeah, it just came from somewhere else. Still haven't explained it. And I think we're about done, guys. I hope you enjoyed yourselves. If anybody have any questions about Antarctica display and everything I just made up. Well, that's really tricky. That's what I said, for a short time it fell out of favour, and so the science was, let's see if we can even prove that Mars could hold life. But that takes a while to get a mission to Mars, and it's all just right. Meanwhile, the science of Earth has moved on in the last couple of years. There's been a lot more. So, trying to prove on Mars, if it's still going to fly.